There she is.
Good morning,
Hi,
Dr.
good
Khan.
morning,
Thank
Dr.
you for
Karen.
joining
How are
us.
you?
Good morning, gentlemen. I'm doing well today.
Well, we need to do
Wonderful.
better because you have to help this show. You have to do some clinical work with this show this morning.
Well, I'm presuming you're here to talk about that tragic situation regarding Jaden Latchan.
Yes.
Yes, that situation and just the problem of bullying in general.
Mm-hmm.
How pervasive is the issue of bullying from your interactions?
Well, I think we could all agree that it is unfortunately a very common phenomenon, and not just in schools. We have bullying taking place at different levels of society. We have bullying taking place in workplaces across the country as well. So, unfortunately, this phenomena is very prevalent, very common, and unfortunately, it takes tragic circumstances like what just happened to shine a national spotlight on it. But this is something that many children, teenagers, adults struggle with on a regular basis.
Yeah, as you brought up adults, because when we were discussing bullying yesterday, we brought up the issue that it's so pervasive in the society. It's not just restricted to schools. You see evidence of it in the society in terms of extortion, in terms of so many stories you hear in workplaces. People may be bullied, and so there seems to be it seems to be very pervasive across all sectors and across the society generally. And how do people navigate it? Because we on the morning show here have all been, and we remember going to, well, of course, when we were in school, and we're saying we all experienced bullying, all of us. And we somehow got through it. And I mean, how do psychologists navigate people through that? Because there are scars that remain with you.
Yeah. And I'm really glad that you put it in that way, Richard, because sometimes people think, oh, well, that happened to me is no big deal, is a natural part of childhood. Children will be children, etc. And we don't all get through it. Many of us, you just try to survive, but you might still be carrying the trauma and the scars from bullying. And so I think one of the ways that we can help people navigate it is first promoting a wider understanding of what bullying behavior is, because there are many things that are occurring on a regular basis that people wouldn't think is
Well, I'm
bullying.
glad you said it. What is bullying?
Right. So let's start with that. So, what is bullying? So, bullying is when there is aggressive behavior that is intended to cause harm, and it happens on a repetitive, on ongoing basis. And critically, there's an imbalance of power. So let's break down those bits. So, what kind of behaviors can be considered bullying behaviors? It could be physical, so shoving, pushing, hitting, kicking, getting up in people's personal space. It could be verbal, so the insults, the name calling. Um, it could also be cyberbullying now, because we have such a prevalence of social media, so text message and WhatsApp groups on the internet. And it could also be indirect, so it doesn't have to happen face to face, but things like social exclusion. So if we think in the context of children, they're being excluded, nobody wants to play with them, they don't invite them, they don't include them. Or rumor spreading, that you say things about people and you share things about them online. All of these can constitute forms of bullying. And the imbalance of power, I think, is a really important concept to understand the difference. Because you could have two children who get into a fight and they're peers. So that act of, say, that one act of indiscipline, but because there is an equal power between the two, they're pairs of equal standing, we wouldn't call that bullying. So bullying happens when there's somebody who has more power than somebody else.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because if you look at every situation that we personally experience, or we see in the media, or we hear about or read about, the bully never attacks somebody bigger or stronger. Never.
And there's a reason for that, because they can't assert power over somebody. So oftentimes the victims that they choose are persons who are in a position where they feel they could dominate them, and it could be on the basis of anything, whether it's age, gender, ethnicity, orientation, your stature, if you have a disability. And you see, the thing is, we need to start examining our culture a little bit more, because we have a whole established tradition of pickong and name calling and nicknames and that sort of thing. And nothing is wrong with that per se, as long as everybody is sharing in the joke. Because if you're making a joke at someone and calling them a name, and everybody else is laughing but not that person, then it's no longer funny.
Exactly.
And it's causing harm.
What's the origin of the behavior? And I know there are several reasons where the bully, him or herself, engages in this behavior. What are the origins of the behavior?
So origins of the bullying behavior can be many. Sometimes bullies have been bullied themselves. We can look at some individual factors. We can look at familial and social factors. So with the familial factors, if we have poor supervision and there's poor discipline, so that children don't understand what that bullying behavior is like, or how to have good, healthy social and emotional skills. But we also have to consider the environment, because many times people think of bullying as a dynamic between the bully and the victim. So what's going on between these two people? But often it exists in a context. So we have to look at that context. So whether it's a school space or whether it's a workplace or even the community. So are we indifferent when we see these acts going on? Do we care to be engaged? Do we implicitly encourage that kind of behavior? Because haha is funny. Watch him with his bent foot or his drop eye, or she has a stutter, and we think that those things are funny, and so we encourage bullying behavior, whether we do so directly or indirectly. So there are factors.
I just wanted to sorry to interrupt you,
No.
Dr. Khan, but the issue of, because we brought up this issue yesterday, that you have a marginalized community and minority in terms of the LGBTQ community,
Yes.
which is a minority group in the school system, naturally, but subject to bullying, and bullying that sometimes may or may not be encouraged by teachers who don't, because they think it's all right.
Yes.
To call a boy, a hen or a faggot, or things like that, or a girl correspondingly other derogatory names, because they are different. And that's a cultural thing, because it's almost like that's accepted in terms of the society. It's almost like the society turns a blind eye to certain communities and that the bullying that happens towards them. How do you navigate that in a school system? How do you navigate that in a culture that almost seems to encourage it?
Well, that's the thing. We have a big barrier in society when at the national level, we're not prepared to discuss certain topics in schools. So that we're not prepared to talk about gender diversity and orientation in schools for all of the different reasons that people come up with, none of which I think are justifiable. Because what is happening is exactly what you said. It's creating an environment where an already vulnerable community is now being further subject to bullying and abuse and discrimination, and not because of who they are, but because of a system that is encouraging it. Because not only do we have adults in the system who think that might be okay, you also have the other adults who are indifferent. So they don't really care. That's not my problem. That's between you. So I'm not here to do that. I'm here to do X, Y, and Z. So I'm not going to get involved. And I think we have to start to recognize that spaces like schools have an ethical right until we strengthen the laws to make sure that they have a legal right as well. Yeah. So right now, I think they probably only have an ethical right to protect and safeguard all students.
Well, is that correct?
I have a
Because in a school scenario, my understanding is that a teacher or a school administrator may be legally responsible for the safety of that child in that compound. And if that includes mental or psychological well-being or emotional well-being, to me that still stands.
Well, maybe the system needs to be tested to see if the laws that we have in place really can protect children in that space, because then there'd have to be a whole framework to support that. There'd have to be the policies and regulations that they are found to be in breach of. And if there are too many loopholes and gaps in those policies and regulations, then we wouldn't see it through to fruition.
But to Richard's point,
Dr. Khan.
isn't it also that one of the issues that we're facing in schools and the wider societies is in terms of protection of minority groups is the individual's personal feelings on the issue, because they will protect a different kind of scenario. They will
Yes.
protection a different kind of scenario.
Yes, and just to address that point, I know Wendell wants to come in to say that in settings like that as well, you have a professional responsibility. So in many of our professions, we cannot let personal biases affect the way that we do our jobs. And certainly teaching is one of them. Being a psychologist, that's another job. Being a doctor, any kind of service provision, even if you're in customer service, you cannot let your personal biases affect your job, especially when your bias is going to cause harm and discrimination. And so that's why, again, we have to start looking at the culture, the organizational culture or national culture, in addition to having policies and rules and laws to protect people.
Do you believe, Dr. Khan, that, and you would know this from your observations, that children who are privileged, more privileged than others, in other words, they are at home, they get what they want, they get to travel, they get to wear jewelry, they get extra money for their allowances. Do you think they are more prone to be bullies?
Well, I'm not sure that how much. So if I go statistically with you, I'm not sure how much that factor. So whether how much privilege will explain bullying behavior. I think that there are a range of other factors, because you could have children from any strata, socioeconomic strata, middle class, upper middle class, higher up than that, and not all of them are going to be bullies. So it also depends on other things that are going on. So as I said, discipline, supervision, our opinion about, what do they have good, healthy socio-emotional skills. So I think, we don't want to paint a broad brush, because I think bullies can come from any background, but certainly when we do see cases and there are certain factors involved, we have to address them.
Yeah, because why I'm asking that question, I mean, back in my day, we didn't have these kind of privileges, but you see videos sometimes of children being brats, for want of a better word, and parents are unable to control them. You understand? So you think that a child like that, certainly if that child is doing that with a parent, could you imagine what that child might be doing with a peer in school? So that was the basis of my question.
Yeah, I don't think all privileged kids are bullies, but I think some can be if there's poor supervision, the sense of entitlement, a sense that I am better than others and I look down on others. But again, there are those other factors. So then we have to look at the parenting, the socialization, the discipline, because in a school, so that might occur, more, but in a school setting where we're supposed to have other measures in place. So where you're supposed to have a whole structure in place so that all children are treated similarly. What are the measures that are being put in place there to you can't mitigate everything, you can't police everything, but what are we putting in place to ensure that the school is an even playground?
Yeah. Dr. Khan, how much are we underestimating the cues children are taking from the wider society, particularly in the age of social media, where long ago, 20 years ago, you could turn off the TV. Now, every 12, 14-year-old has a phone. All sorts of content are coming toward them. They're seeing how leaders in society are behaving, artists, music artists, entertainers are behaving, and taking their cues from the wider society.
Oh, we are very much underestimating this. I think it's not just an underestimation. I think we don't appreciate it enough and are aware of it enough, of the many sources of influence on children and also at their developmental stage, how susceptible and vulnerable they are to being influenced. So now we look at some of the theories in psychology. So for example, the social learning theory, which tells us that children will model behavior that they see, especially if it's people that they admire. So if it's or respect, so if it's their parents or some influencer that they're looking at or some artists, they are more likely to model that behavior. And so, but we always have to have, you might have all of this music there, but it affects some children in some ways and some teens in some ways and not. So it truly is the constellation of factors. But to that point, Paul, what I would say specifically is I think we do need more examples of pro-social behavior, of healthy behavior, of behavior that is not unkind and cruel, because what we have now in social media are the things that grab your attention.
You like
And
culture.
things, yeah, the rage bait things. So the things that stir up an intense reaction, the things that are entertaining and shocking. And those things are not the things that might be, the pro-social behavior. And so we're seeing that now, even in terms of how things are reported in the media. We want shocking headlines to grab people's attention because we're trying to get our share of the market. And what impact is that having on a society and a people when there's all this rage bait or there's all this things to stir up a reaction, but we don't see anything about resolution and coping and the good stuff.
Yeah. So is it that the school curriculum needs to be adjusted to include, now I don't know what the school curriculum is like in primary school at this point or secondary schools. I'm assuming it's absent to deal with the rebalancing of those messages that you could get from social media, or contextualizing it for students that if you see X, Y, and Z on social media, you have to be able to discern what exactly you are talking about there. What is rage bait? What is this? What is that? And also the basic issue of human decency, empathy, and kindness. And classes that are structured, a class that is structured around those basic intangibles that we all as human beings should have in the social contract we have with each other as we navigate life on this planet. And is that something that should be in primary schools and secondary schools as part of the learning process? Because I'm not too sure how much it is there now. This basic thing of getting up if you're on a bus and there's a pregnant woman standing up next to you, that you should give up your seat to an older person. I don't know how much young people know about those basic forms of etiquette anymore.
Well, Richard, there are two strands, and Paul will be familiar with this. We talk about a curriculum, and then we talk about a hidden curriculum in schools. And I think both are equally and critically important. So yes, where we can build these things into a curriculum, it's very important. And I know they do have some aspects of life skills in the various curricula across the schools. But unless that is reinforced and enhanced by other aspects in the hidden curriculum, then we're just doing a piecemeal approach. So this has to be a whole school approach at all levels. So when we talk about the hidden curriculum, what we're talking about are the things that are not explicitly taught, but children learn things from it. So the culture and the environment of the school. So for example, you gave the example of the pregnant woman on the bus. But what about if you're at school and you see a teacher carrying a lot of books? So do you offer to, Miss, do you need some help? Or do you open the door? Or if a child is walking and something falls, do you pick it up for them? So what are these, what are the values, what are the behaviors that are being encouraged and reinforced in the environment? So they're not just hearing about it in a lesson, but they're seeing it being acted out. They're seeing it being reinforced. We encourage it. And also this framework can't just be, we teach something and that's it. Standalone policies don't work. They're not sustainable. They're not effective. It has to be buttressed by a whole framework. So let me give you a specific example. We hear about zero tolerance policies and it sounds like it's a good thing, zero tolerance. But that in and of itself is not going to fix it, because if we also accompanying that, we don't have interventions to have appropriate discipline Okay, not just punishment, but appropriate discipline and behavior management. And if we don't have interventions to teach the socio-emotional skills, so for example, bullying doesn't just start. You don't start by, as I said, it's repetitive, but often it builds up. And there are many behaviors that are gateway behaviors. And this week I've been talking about it with my students at the UE, and we were talking about things like, you're in a class and a child is saying something, and then other people roll in their eyes and snickering and hee on the side. Those behaviors are mean behaviors. They're unkind, they're inappropriate. And unless we start to regulate some of those, it escalates.
Dr. Khan,
yes.
You just brought back a very vivid memory for me. When you spoke about those children who would be like teachers' pets, the teacher would always ask them to help with whatever, or stand in front of the class to make sure that the class keeps quiet when the teacher leaves. I was that type of student. And I think you just brought back a memory that I think that it was also part the reason why I was bullied as a child. You understand? Because I was always the helpful child. I was always the quiet, reserved child. You understand? Not playing in the yard with everybody else and whatnot. And so that what you said just now just came back full circle to me.
Dr. Khan, one of the issues we face in Trinidad and Tobago, when people say, because I'm seeing several people in the chat accurately saying, well, the family is a really powerful, as you know, socializing agent. Your mother, your father, your home circle. And very often people make the presumption, erroneously so, that all families are the same and all families have the same moral code and all parents raise their children the same way, which is far from the truth. So it goes to Richard's point. How does the education system act as the equalizer, so to speak? Because the children come from so many different backgrounds that one cannot assume that all parents are teaching their children the same thing. There are parents who will actually tell your child, don't be soft. If you watch your hand, cuff him. You understand? Or don't take on that teacher, right? And the teacher has to deal with all of these different backgrounds and try to have some sort of universal approach to imparting morals and values in these children.
Well, and some children are bullied from home, Paul.
And if some of them are bullied from home and model that behavior.
You have that too. You have bullying taking place sometimes by parents. You enter the school system lacking in confidence already.
Yeah. And so that's why I think the schools need to have consistency and fairness and equity. So just as how we have a practice of having children wear uniforms. And one of the reasons is that uniforms are an equalizer. Everybody's coming with the same thing. So similarly, the interactions at school have to be consistent. So what are the values that we endorse? So if we respect everyone, then we respect all the children and all their comments and questions and statements, so that in the classroom we're not snickering or laughing at somebody if they get something wrong, or if they say something that people think is a stupid question or comment, or if they have something different about them. So I think it's really important that we start to teach children about respect and these values that are going to promote the pro-social behaviors that we want to see. So when you see them excluding a child, and oftentimes you might not see it necessarily in the classroom, but you watch them at recess or you watch them lunchtime on the corridors and you'll pick up on it. So therefore, what do? Do we say, well, that's children and it's recess, like our police, everything? No, we have to act. So what do? We don't buff up the children and say, well, you have to include Richard in your football game at recess. That's not going to promote the pro-social behavior, because then you're just, dictating, and we don't learn. Human beings don't learn in that way. So then we have to find ways to teach them about why that's unkind and how would you feel if you were excluded. So whether you role play, you talk it through with them. And you said earlier that children pick up things very, very young ages, even before they could speak. Toddlers, little children can sense things in the environment and react accordingly. So let's not underestimate children's ability to understand things and understand that at that age they can appreciate what it feels like to be excluded. We can teach them empathy. We can teach them how to be more inclusive. We can teach them to stand up for others. That's the other thing we want to have in schools, that if you see someone being bullied, that you are brave enough and you do feel strongly about it, that you could speak up and say, hey, Steve, leave Paul alone. That's not fair.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That happens all the time.
Dr. Khan, as you're talking there, it occurred to me, do we all as human beings, because it's easy for us to have this conversation and exclude ourselves from it. Do we all as human beings have to be vigilant about the fact that sometimes we can be bullies and have a blind spot to the fact that we are in the position of a bully in terms of how we deal with other people?
Oh, yes. That's self-awareness and insight. It's such a critical tool. Not everybody is prepared to do that kind of work, because not everybody is prepared to confront that about themselves. Why? Why am I? You might think, well, I'm blunt and I call it as it is, and you want to see that as a virtue. But really, and in fact, what it is that you're mean. And why are you being mean? Why are you being so cruel and unkind? Is it something that happened in your past that has shaped? Is it some past trauma of your own that you have not fully processed? And so now you visit it onto other people and you're unapologetic about it? And think about that. It's even worse when there's that imbalance of power. So you are in a position of power, and you are the one who is being blunt, unkind, cruel, and mean. The impact that has on your victim is going to be significant.
Can it also be some sort of defense mechanism in that person who may have gone through trauma before?
Oh, yes. Yeah. So defense mechanisms are that comes from the psychoanalytic orientation. And what it is an attempt to resolve that anxiety, and the anxiety may be from past trauma. And there are healthy defense mechanisms and there are unhealthy ones. And so we need to think about whether this strategy I'm using is one of the unhealthy ones.
You're making Freud very happy this morning. I know we have 5 minutes left. I want to kind of just segue the conversation a bit, because I think it's along the same lane that we're talking about here, imbalances of power and what we're seeing manifest. Just yesterday, again, a woman and a child murdered by a male relative, and the levels of domestic violence. And again, that comes from power imbalances. Let's talk about that a bit in relation to the overall discussion.
Oh, I don't know that 4 minutes will do that. But yes, if we just touch on it, because it was very shocking. And I think as a nation, we're getting so beleaguered and traumatized by all these incidences of different kinds of violence, whether it's bullying or domestic violence. And coincidentally, I'm the current interim president of the Coalition Against Domestic Violence. So, of course, this topic is something that we recognize as a huge problem in society. And again, trying to ascertain the causes for such violence and what policies, that interventions that we need to put in place to kind of disrupt this epidemic of violence we see in our country. It's so incredibly tragic that we have persons who cannot regulate, whether it's their own distress, discomfort, their feelings. So it's a breakup, it's a divorce. How do we deal with conflict? Do we deal with trauma without having to resort to these kinds of aggressive acts that are so tragic? So as a country, again, Paul, I want to say that it exists on all levels. So when we encourage beating children, because that's the only way to discipline them, and they learn that aggression is an acceptable way to resolve issues, then what do we expect when they get older? There is no magic switch that takes place to teach them other ways to manage behaviors. When we teach people that rejection, social rejection is it's tied to your identity. So as a man, you can't leave me. I have the power in this relationship. You're leaving me. You're threatening that power. And I have to take back that power in a very violent and aggressive way. So as I said, it's a huge topic, one that we need to have many more conversations. We need to keep it on the front burner because we can't afford to. Too many lives are being lost and destroyed to domestic violence.
Yeah.
I had a question. I know we don't have much time, but how much do you feel some sort of religious lack of, well, back in our day we went to Sunday school and all these things. How do you feel? How much do you feel that is contributing to what is happening in some of our schools? Children not having that kind of early spiritual grounding.
The religion is the biggest bully of them all.
Oh Lord, you hush. You
But
hush.
go on.
I was hoping he didn't come back on, Dr. Khan.
It's a double-edged sword, Wendell. For some people, religion can be very helpful and a helpful tool. But if we see religion as a proxy for instilling values, you can have values instilled through other aspects in society. Yeah. And as he was saying, I'm sorry, I do have to agree with him a little bit, that there is a negative side to it as well in terms of the perpetuation of attitudes and values. Yeah, so it is a double-edged sword. And I think for persons and families for which religion can be protective, then it is a good strategy, but it doesn't work for everyone. And the thing that we want from it, the values, that can come through other ways.
Yeah. I hope we can have you back really soon.
Yeah,
I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you for having me. It's been very
conversation. Thank you so much. Have a
wonderful. Just have this peaceful voice and
that's it. The voice is so peaceful.
Yeah, that you calm everything down. Look at how you calm down, Paul and Richard today.
Tell me that.
Gentlemen, I appreciate it. Thank you very much for having me on, and good morning to all of your listeners.
Have a great day.
Thank you. All the best. You have a great day.
Thank you.
All right.